Greetings, everybody. I'm Dean Chalou, President of Society. I want to welcome everybody to this, what promises to be a very, very interesting presentation by collection technician Sarah Jauris, who's been working on this and the exhibit and taking part in a documentary that a board member, Jeremy Fraser, and former board member John Sad have created. So I just want to say hi and thank you all for coming down today. So without any further ado, I'll introduce Sarah Jauris.
Delivering the mail was considered an essential service during World War II. Mail allowed military personnel serving in the United States and overseas and loved ones at home to communicate. Military personnel might write about their experiences and inquire about life at home. Loved ones at home, meanwhile, often wrote about life on the home front, news about friends and family, and their daily activities. Mail occupied a significant amount of space and weight in overseas shipping for the military. Victory Mail, or V-Mail, was created to address this problem, in which letters written on a V-Mail form paper were transferred to microfilm, shipped at a fraction of the weight and volume of the original letters, printed out, and delivered as a miniature letter. This communication and ability to communicate kept morale high. Today, these letters allow their writers to tell their stories in their own words 80 years after World War II. Speaking of the importance of mail, the first of our subjects, Clarence Whitney of Nashua, received no mail for several weeks. During this time, he transferred from London to North Africa. He finally received word from home on December 19, 1942. The next day, he replied to a letter from his friend, Margaret Beeson Swart, writing, "For weeks and weeks I have had no mail, but last night a messenger placed nearly 30 letters and cables into my eager little hands. Yours was amongst them. By golly, but it was good and no foolin'. Ask any soldier overseas, particularly old broken soldiers like ye scribe, and they'll tell you that actually there's a period when mail is looked for more eagerly than good food." Clarence Whitney was the vice president of the Indian Head National Bank in Nashua. He had served in World War I, where he had met his wife, Doris. In 1942, Whitney was called up for military service and served at the Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force, also known as SHAEF, at a desk job in the Information Control and Psychological Warfare Divisions. Whitney served in London, England, in North Africa, including in Algiers and Tunisia, and in Germany. While serving abroad, Whitney exchanged letters with his close friend, Margaret Beeson Swart, whom Whitney referred to by the nickname Marky. She lived in Nashua with her husband and daughter, Peggy. Whitney began one letter with, "You don't mind if I type this letter, do you? As you know, my writing is something terrible and isn't getting any better." He was unusual in that he typed his letters, and even his V-mail. Typewriters were in limited supply since they were needed for military paperwork, and the metals needed to produce them had been diverted for the war effort. Whitney likely had access to one through his job. Working for the Information Control Division, one of Whitney's duties was to censor mail. Each piece of mail being sent from a member of the military needed to have a censor's stamp. You can see here by the signature that Clarence Whitney censored his own mail. Margaret Beeson Swart was engaged in occupational therapy work with GIs at Fort Devens and was a chair of the Arts and Skills Corps of the American Red Cross. Swart wrote to Whitney that she also participated in the Aircraft Warning Service, in which she watched for enemy airplanes from a lookout tower. Whitney wrote that his wife, Doris, tells me that she too does observation post watching. Golly, it must be cold away up there, particularly on windy, wintry days. It's a good idea, but I think Les Allemands are too busy to shoot up the Merrimack Valley. Swart and Whitney agreed that when you sit down to write a person, you are having a little visit and chat, even though that person might be far away. They discussed friends, family, and acquaintances. Whitney commented on news about Swart's young daughter, writing, "I had a grand laugh over Peggy's plaints that she seemed somehow or other to always be in trouble. Very like her mother, I should say, who, if my memory is any good at all, was never out of trouble." Whitney also responded to news about a mutual friend's child, though he then wrote, "I get a bit mixed about her children. I've had but one letter from her. Probably that was all I deserved for not having written to her for 20-odd years." Whitney wrote about the weather quite a bit. London was too cold and foggy. Africa was warmer. The weather here is perhaps a little cooler than down in Sarasota, but warmer than in Jacksonville. When it is fair, the mountains and sea are beautiful, but this is the rainy season, although some days have been clear and very warm. He also commented on the people and culture in that part of Africa, noting that most people spoke French, and enclosed a picture postcard for Swart. You can see it here. His French was better, but wrote, "I bone up a little each day, learn a few new words, and so maybe I'll get along somehow." Whitney was just beginning to like Algiers when he was shipped back to England. He wrote of the weather there, saying in June 1944, "You know that the summers here can't touch our lovely New England ones. I've been cold ever since coming up here." He wrote further on the subject in September, stating, "I didn't think we would have any decent summer weather here, but August was generally very lovely, and if it hadn't been for the flying bombs, I think I really would have enjoyed it." Whitney later expressed surprise that Swart liked fog, writing, "I had my fill of London fog last winter. One night I became completely lost between my office and Trafalgar Tube Station, and I'm very familiar with the way." The military kept Clarence Whitney busy. After not responding to a letter from Swart for a couple of weeks, he wrote, "I should receive a good punch in the nose for not acknowledging it sooner. Of course, a fellow can always say he's been busy and whatnot as an excuse, and by golly, that's my excuse." With the activities of the section, of which I have the dubious honor of being chief, spread nearly all over this theater, I'm slowly but surely going mad. Of course, I was a bit mad to start with. I'm hoping on hope that I can conduct my operations from here in England. Going over to France or any other continental nation leaves me cold. I've done all the wandering I care about. Whitney did, in fact, not serve in France, but he did end up in a continental nation by the end of the war. He served in Germany. Whitney also wrote to Swart about a promotion he received. Having begun the war as a major, he was happy to earn a promotion in late 1944 or early 1945 to lieutenant colonel. He explained that it took longer for higher-ranking personnel to earn promotions, and wrote that, "I had been a major for so long that I was afraid you people back home would think me a complete dope," which of course is incorrect, as I'm only partly that. Whitney missed home dearly while he was away. In his first letter in December 1942, he hoped that the war would end soon, writing, "Things seem to be going very well, don't they? Maybe next Christmas we'll have me having Christmas dinner back in the States. And I hope, and I think about a lot, that I may drink scotch with your dad again." Whitney would remain abroad for another 3 years, seeing the war to its conclusion in 1945. In 1944, in response to a question from Swart, he replied in a somber and likely exhausted fashion, "You wondered in your letter whether I'd want to go back to the bank. I do really want to go back anyway, Marky, my dear. There's no other place for me. What worries me, though, is that in spite of myself, I've developed a different psychology toward life. People and things, and have discovered values in some people and complete lack of values in others. All of these things I had given little thought to before the war. Honestly, Marky, I think it's a bad policy for the Army to keep men overseas for longer than 2 years, and God knows that's too long." After that, Swart sent gifts to Whitney several times, for which he expressed his appreciation. She indulged his taste for salted nuts by sending him a bag of them for Christmas. He wrote, "How thoughtful of you to send me a big bag of nuts. The box has arrived today in perfect condition. I opened it this noon, and I can foresee great enjoyment in the munching of said nuts." I'm fond of salted nuts, and it's quite impossible to buy them here, and the PX doesn't stock them, although it did when I was here in 1942. She also sent soap and comics. Whitney marveled at the very grand soap, which was labeled Apple Blossom, writing, "By cracky, it actually had the scent of apple blossoms." Then along came a book of exceedingly funny cartoons, which I enjoy very much. In fact, it is presently in circulation among some of the people in my circus. In December 1944, Whitney received a letter written in November from Swart. He replied, "Gosh, Marky, I'd like to come home, if even for a little while, and then return here, but such stuff is not on the books for those of the chairborne divisions. But I do want you to know this, pal, that your letter in reply to the one I wrote when I was feeling darned low was a great help to me. Honestly, no kidding either." He also commented with some envy on Swart's vacation, writing, "Sprawled on the sand at Rye. That is complete enjoyment and no mistake. I'll have so many things to catch up on when I return that I'll not know where to start." In a later letter, he wrote to apologize for his behavior after finally being able to visit home in 1945, writing that, "My trip home seems now like something which never happened. It was swell to see you again, my friends and folk, but honestly, Marky, it disturbed me. I'm afraid I didn't react in some cases perhaps as I should have reacted. The change from overseas and military atmosphere was altogether too sudden, and I didn't have time really to orient myself and become acclimated or something. I want awfully to return, to be a civilian, to think as one, and try to take up my old place in Nashua. It isn't going to be too easy, but it will all work out, I know. I know that Doris worries about me, and I wish she wouldn't. She's such a swell person, and I'm more and more convinced I'm just a run-of-the-mill sort of guy. My affairs here in England and in Germany are coming along fairly good, and while it may take a little time, I can see my way out. Patience will be required all around." The Nashua Telegraph reported on this occasion that Doris Whitney had traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet him when he got home. The end of the war brought a renewed desire for Whitney to return home. Whitney was, at that time, serving in Germany. After an illness, Whitney wrote to Swart in high spirits on December 14, 1945. "I did get some rest, but I'd just as soon have picked the manner in which the rest occurred. However, these things happen to the best of men, I mean men in the best of health, because otherwise I'm a miracle of health, excusing my nearly 52 years, of course. Thank the Lord, Marky, this looks very much like the end of the road. Personnel has changed very much here in the last 2 months. I know now but a dozen people in this outfit, but they were very glad to see me back here again. I found that I had been relieved of my command, which tickled me to no end, as it has been a pretty onerous assignment this last year and a half and more. Marky, my dear old friend, I can never adequately thank you for your letters during the last few years. They've been wonderful and a surprising help. I'll say no more about them now. I'll not come home for Christmas, but should be home soon thereafter and will settle down where I belong. That may take some doing, and all hands must try and be patient with this old gentleman. Good night, Marky, and thanks for every single thing." Alfred Picard was working for the Nashua Manufacturing Company and living in Nashua when he was drafted in round 1A of the draft in 1942. He was part of a French-Canadian family and exchanged letters throughout the war with his parents, Angelina and Joseph, who lived in Nashua with his sister Bella and their grandmother, as well as several cousins in Canada and Nashua. He wrote to his parents in French and to his extended family in English. Some of the French letters had been translated into English by Janine T. Levesque. Thank you, Janine. His mother was a mill worker in a textile mill, and his sister worked for the Granite State Knitting Company. His cousin, Jerry, lived in Canada, while 2 other cousins, George Tessier, who went by Bill, and Wilfred Tessier, who went by Pete, lived on the same street as the Picards in Nashua. This is the only known image of Alfred Picard in the Nashua Historical Society's collection. This was taken when he was drafted and was published in the Nashua Telegraph. The men in the photograph are all draftees. You can see the man in the lighter coat is Picard right here. Picard had been considering enlisting in the Navy when he was drafted into the Army. Shortly after he was drafted, his cousin, Jerry, wrote, "You closed your last letter with goodbye and good luck. Well, my dear cousin, I think you're the one who's going to need the luck." Drafted 1A. It surely won't take long. Well, it was going to happen sooner or later. Later if preferable, I always thought. Jerry also complained that Picard's letters were too short. Most of his letters, in fact, ranged from 1 to 2 pages, and Jerry argued that he was not getting his postages worth. Picard received training at Camp Lee, Virginia, to become a medical technician. He wrote home after arriving there with the news that it's a medical camp and they have given me the technical course. If I had known how to drive, I would have driven an ambulance or a truck. I think, and they tell me, I will never carry a rifle in this course. He went on to share of his travels. I left Camp Devens at 7:25 p.m. Tuesday night and arrived at Camp Lee Wednesday night at 7:15 p.m. In passing, I saw the White House where Roosevelt is. I saw the city of Baltimore, Philadelphia, Buffalo, New York, Jersey City, and many other cities. He also wrote of his schedule and daily life. Here we arise at 6 a.m. and go to bed at 11 p.m. For food, we have enough not to waste. The soldiers here are all like brothers. I think you will be interested in knowing how I look in a soldier's suit. Well, I look tolerably well. Bella sent him a pen so that he could write to them, which he used and appreciated, although he sometimes ran out of ink mid-letter and had to switch to pencil. He also commented that he had to spend a lot of money at the beginning buying certain articles in a life insurance policy, and warned his parents that he would be asking for money if he was allowed to visit home. In April, he wrote, I was very happy to receive your lovely letter. It's the only one and the first letter I have received since I have been at camp. It gives me something to reread and to think of Nashua. Right now, it is hot enough that I don't know where to put myself to write. I still have my winter undershirt underneath. He updated his family on his activities, including receiving vaccinations. This week, they gave us 2 injections. The worst to come up until now. Soldiers lost consciousness all around me, but I stayed on my feet like a man. Before closing with, pardon my complaining, but at present I am dripping, covered with sweat. These heavy shoes and winter underwear. He hoped to be stationed at a hospital, not knowing where he might be sent in a medical profession. He reassured his family that in the last war, the number of dead or the percentage in the medical corps was listed in 5th place. That shows that I have one of the best places to not be killed or wounded. Picard's mother wrote to him every week as often as she could, saying that many people had left factories and schools to join the military. Their whole family missed Picard, and his mother wrote, Your grandmother wants me to tell you she thinks of you often, and we assure you she will never forget you. And Bella doesn't play the radio very much. Each time the radio plays, she sends all her thoughts toward you. This gives her an even greater yearning to see you too. Napoleon, one of his uncles, hasn't played it since you left. We hope, nevertheless, that your health remains good, and have a good desire that you do not drown too much in misery. She continued, You don't know the interest with which we receive and read every letter from you. We appreciate that your departure has very much affected us, and to reread your letters encourages us to console ourselves. In late May 1942, Picard was one of 10 soldiers to win a 3-day pass to leave. He was quite excited to go home, as you can see by his writing. This last section translates to, Don't forget me, for Thursday. After the big inspection Friday, I leave for Nashua, if I have the money. He wrote home asking for $25 so he could visit. Unfortunately, he had injured his foot while marching and could not visit home until later due to being hospitalized. He wrote to his family while he was recovering. I am sorry that I wasn't able to keep my promise. I hope that you were not too disappointed. As for me, I was really disappointed. As to my foot, it's nothing serious. It's only that it is sore when I walk, and that makes me limp a little. Picard later bought some march supports to help the pains he got in his feet after marching for an extended period of time. He was then stationed at Fort Eustis, Virginia, with the medical detachment of the 1,321st Service Unit. He wrote home so immediately upon arrival that he was unable to include many details because he had yet to leave the barracks. He later updated them as to what he was doing, writing, Currently, I am assisting a dentist who is a captain. I work during the day like a civilian. I wear a white outfit during the day. My duties are to fetch the patients from the waiting room and to give tools to the dentist while he works, handle his stuff, and fill out Form 524. I no longer march with my pack, and I have no more drilling. I miss the good air and outdoors. He was not pleased with Fort Eustis in general, stating, I don't like the place. The service for mailing letters is poor. I have to run a mile, and I have to run after my mail. Picard exchanged letters with the Tessiers, who were both in the military. He also updated his family at home with news about his cousins, such as when Pete Tessier moved to a base in Maine. Picard later served at O'Reilly General Hospital in Springfield, Missouri. By 1944, Picard had reached the rank of corporal and was preparing to ship out with the medical detachment of the 23rd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron Mechanized. After the war, he returned to working in Nashua. Roger Caron was one of more than 10 children and one of 4 boys who worked to support their family, including their single mother and sisters. His brothers also served in the military during World War II. He worked at the J.F. McElwain Shoe Company in Nashua. In 1943, when he was 18 years old, Caron was drafted into the Army. Within a year, he was fighting in Europe. Caron served as a machine gunner with the 157th Infantry Regiment, 45th Division. He was stationed at Fort Devens in Massachusetts before he shipped out to Europe. There, he participated in the invasion of Italy, the capture of Rome, the invasion of southern France. Caron wrote these letters over a relatively short period of time, while he was serving in southern France during the winter of 1944 to 1945. Caron wrote to his sisters and mother at home. Based on his letters, he cared about them very much and liked to joke around. In November 1944, he updated them on his brother Joe, who had written to him from his post in the Navy. He's in perfect health, but what I don't like, he told me the Navy is tough. He doesn't have to stay in the rain, cold, and snow, live in a dugout or a foxhole. That's the Army life, sis. He's better off than me. We can't all be in the Navy. Somebody has to do all the fighting. Haha, don't worry, sis. Everything is all right. At Christmas, he joked to his younger sister, Blanche. Is Santa going to see you this Christmas? Of course he will. That's if you're a good girl and leave the little boys alone. He also sent home $35 so that his sister could buy a Christmas gift for their mother. Caron wrote many times telling his family not to worry. He also wrote multiple times about the food, stating to his mother in December that the food is very good, Ma, and all we want, so please don't worry. He continued, the war don't look too good up here. I don't think it will end before March, maybe after that. A few days later, before rejoining his company after recovering from a wounded ankle, Caron wrote, don't worry, everything is all right up here. I'm going back with the boys tomorrow, so everything is okay. The food is very good, Ma, but I miss your chocolate cream pie. Let's hope I'm home soon so I can get some, Ma. Will this war ever end? The more I think of it, the worse it gets, so I'll just forget the whole thing. Tell Arlene, his eldest sister, not to work too hard and take it easy. Ma, don't worry, because I'm taking things very easy. A few days later, he advised his brother to keep a job at Hart's Market, and ended with the hope that he would be home soon, so I can eat your chocolate cream pie. In a letter to his eldest sister, Lucille, Caron told her not to worry about him receiving his mail, and that he would receive it when he returned to his company. At the start of his letter, after assuring her of his good health and wishing for hers, he wrote about a very important matter. Before I go on, he wrote, tell Ma to send me some good chocolate. You can see in this image how he added good with a caret. Right there. He went on to say that he was sick of the rainy weather and that he had gone to Mass and asked, well, Lucille, when do you think this war will end? In about 5 or 6 years from now, haha. He closed by joking that Lucille should let their elder sister Arlene do all the work, and with a reminder about a matter they had been writing back and forth about the month prior. The previous month, in a letter written on November 1st, Karen had written to his sister Lucille and referenced a previous letter in which he asked Lucille to buy a gift for his girlfriend, Wilda Gagnon. That's her there. Lucille, I told you to buy Wilda a Christmas gift. You must know what I want to buy her. It's a ring and you know what kind. I was going to get her one, but I didn't want to take the chance. Lucille, get one as soon as you can, and when you do, let me know so I don't get one. I know Ma said to get one after the war. Tell Ma that the war will be over before Christmas. I can't wait to get one when I get home. Who knows, I may stay here 2 or 3 years after the war is over. Sis, you might as well get one, because if you don't, I will, and take the chance of sending it, sis, from France. Over the course of his correspondence with Lucille, Karen made plans to propose to his sweetheart, Wilda Gagnon. He had not proposed sooner because he feared her answer, and his mother had advised him to wait until after the war. But he seems to have had a change of perspective after fighting his way up the Italian peninsula and into southern France against the German army. On February 2nd, 1945, the Karen family received a telegram from the government informing them that Roger Karen had been reported missing in action on January 17th, 1945, 6 weeks after his 19th birthday. Karen's family and girlfriend wrote to acquaintances in the army, looking for answers. For a time, since no new information and no body were found, they hoped that he might still be alive, perhaps suffering from amnesia and unable to find his way home. It appears that no further information was forthcoming until March 1st, when Karen's mother received a letter from his section sergeant, Clarence C. Wendling of Kentucky. My dear Mrs. Karen, he wrote, it is not easy for me to speak to you, because there are no words in this cruel world that can express my sympathies to you over the loss of your son, Roger. Roger and I were very close friends, and he was always with me wherever I went. I was at his side when he passed away. He could not tell her how Roger died because of censorship, but promised to visit to explain in person. In late April, another soldier replied to a letter from Wilda Gagnon with the message, you were right when you said everything is so mixed up. It's a long story, and I'm afraid I can't tell you about it now. Section Sergeant C. Wendling wasn't telling you a lie. This man informed her that Section Sergeant Wendling and Karen had been sharing a foxhole when Karen died, and that Wendling had been so affected by Karen's death that he then got a job at the far rear. In July, Lucille Karen heard from one Private First Class Leon Brown, Jr. He explained what he had heard and what he had speculated might have happened. Roger and the sergeant was in a foxhole together, and they, the Germans, start throwing some shells in on them. Roger looking up to see where they were hitting, and just then, one came in and hit right outside their hole. Then was when Roger was hit. The sergeant did all he could for him, at the same time calling for the aid man. But by the time the aid man got there, Roger had passed on. Soldiers carried 2 dog tags, so that in the event of their death, any living military personnel in the vicinity can take one and mark the location of the body, with the intent to return for their fallen comrade later. However, in the chaos and heavy shelling of the battle, Karen's dog tags remained with his body, and the foxhole where he had died was lost. But this is not the end of Roger Karen's story. A year after he was reported missing in action, the military closed the case, assuming him dead. As time passed without news, his family began to hope, instead of returning home alive someday, that his body would be found and brought home. His mother prayed for this every day for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, Roger Karen's friends never forgot him. They talked about him at reunions, sharing memories of the war and recalling the friend they had lost. Decades passed. In 1986, in a forest near Reipertswiller, France, a Mr. Pierre Mahler discovered the remains of an American soldier with a set of dog tags. he contacted the superintendent of the American Battle Monuments Commission at St. Avold, France, who called the supervisory mortuary identification officer, who brought a team to excavate the remains, and brought the remains back to the United States for identification at a lab in Hawaii. There, they were positively identified as the remains of Roger Caron, and his family was contacted with the news. Roger Caron's remains were flown into Boston via Logan Airport. He was then laid to rest beside his mother at Louis de Gonzague Cemetery in Nashua. When his remains were returned, the friends Roger Caron had made while serving in the Army read the story in the newspapers. Ralph W. Fink, the vice president of the 157th Infantry Association, who lived in Pennsylvania, wrote to Caron's eldest sister, "I was shocked and surprised to read that enclosed newspaper story, which was sent to me by an old war buddy from New Jersey. I also had a phone call from another friend in Massachusetts concerning this story, so we can assume it appeared in various newspapers. Roger and I served in the same platoon in the months preceding his death. We became good friends. I especially remember him as a nice young man who spoke French quite well. Having been wounded on December 27, 1944, I was confined to an Army hospital during the month of January 1945. So I was not up in the hills when he died. However, on my return to the unit in early February, I recall several men telling me about the circumstances of Roger's demise. Also, over the years, we have discussed it at reunions. The reason for my shock and surprise is this. Those of us that have remained in contact had no idea that Roger was listed as missing in action for all these years. Fink went on to relate what he thought might have happened. I believe the men placed Roger's body in a foxhole that was partially covered with logs and tree branches. In a massive attack by the Germans, our troops were driven out of the territory under very chaotic circumstances. It is my understanding that after the Germans occupied the territory, the American artillery raked the area unmercifully for several hours. I suspect that during that bombardment, Roger's foxhole may have caved in or possibly been covered over with debris. Caron's sister, Arlene, was quoted in the Nashua Telegraph saying, "We are all relieved to know that he came back to us, and he will be buried in our plot," adding regarding the news that her brother's remains had been discovered and were being returned home, "It's been terrible. That's all I can say." When the war started, Leo Lavoie was working as a machine operator in the waxing department at the Nashua Gummed and Coated Paper Company and was a member of the New Hampshire State Guard. Lavoie enlisted in the Army on June 16, 1942. He lived at 16 D Street in Nashua with his wife, Lorette Lavoie, and their 2 young daughters. In the Army, Private Lavoie specialized as a rifleman and served with the 141st Infantry in Central Europe and in the Rhineland campaign. He earned the Combat Infantryman Badge for participation in active ground combat and the European African Middle Eastern Campaign Ribbon with 2 Bronze Stars, signifying his participation in 2 qualifying campaigns. At home with their daughters, Lorette Lavoie received a telegram from J.A. Ulio, the Adjutant General, on February 20th, 1945, stating, "The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that your husband, Private Leo H. Lavoie, has been reported missing in action since 3 February in France. If further details or other information are received, you will be promptly notified." Following this telegram came letters expressing sympathies and attempting to reassure Mrs. Lavoie that there were many reasons for a person to be reported missing in action and that her husband might still be alive. Mrs. Lavoie then received a form note in French that her husband was in good health and was a prisoner of war at Stalag 5A, a German prison camp in France. It advised her not to try to contact him at or send packages to that address, as he was to be moved to a different location soon after. Private Lavoie was transferred to Stalag 7A, the largest prison camp in Germany, which was north of Moosburg in Bavaria, the southeastern region. It was originally intended to house 10,000 POWs. By 1945, Stalag 7A housed more than 70,000 Allied prisoners of war. The Nashua Gummed-Coated Paper Company created this poster to promote a Red Cross War Fund drive. It features a photograph of Leo Lavoie to encourage his co-workers to donate, since he was missing in action. After a wait of 3 months, on May 19th, Laurette Lavoie received word again from Adjutant General Julio by telegram, weeks after the surrender of Germany. It reads, "The Secretary of War desires me to inform you that your husband, Private Lavoie, Leo H., was a prisoner of war of German government based on information received through the Provost Marshal General's office. Germany having been defeated, it is assumed that he has now been returned to military control. Letter of information follows from Provost Marshal General's office. You will be informed when further information is received." 6 days later, a further telegram arrived stating, "The Secretary of War desires me to inform you that your husband, Private Lavoie, Leo H., returned to military control on the 29th of April, 1945. Report further states, however, he is hospitalized in a European area, not due to enemy action. New address and further information follow direct from hospital. Private Lavoie had been liberated from Stalag 7A. The camp was liberated by the 14th Armored Division in a battle against retreating German forces. The reasons for Lavoie's hospitalization were malnutrition and pneumonia." In July, Laurette Lavoie received one last government telegram, this time from Acting Adjutant General E.F. Witzel. It bore the news, "The Chief of Staff of the Army directs me to inform you, your husband, Private Lavoie, Leo H., is being returned to the United States in the near future and will be given an opportunity to communicate with you upon arrival." Lavoie, then able to travel, returned home to Nashua and his family. He received an honorable discharge on November 21st, 1945. Another Nashuan, James O'Neill, also fought in France. Doris Trudell and James O'Neill met at a dance. She was 15 and attending Nashua High School, now the recently closed Elm Street Middle School. And he was 19 and preparing to leave for the Army. Before he left, O'Neill asked Trudell to wait for him and gave her a ring. Her mother referred to it as a friendship ring, although the couple did not share this view. They sent each other hundreds of letters over the course of the war. She saved the letters. In his earlier letters, O'Neill refers to Trudell by her name, Doris. Later, he switched to a nickname, Trudy. They also called each other Old Fart, and she called him her hunk of beef. O'Neill wrote to Trudell about his experiences, including the places he went in his daily life and what he was doing, such as how tired he was after marching and drilling, and his first encounter with sewing, in which he had to mend a hole in his work pants, writing, "Can you imagine me sewing? It's the first time I ever did that, and what a lousy job I did." He wrote to her about training, the food, movies and music, and whenever he got sick. In November 1942, O'Neill wrote, "Tuesday we are going to sleep out overnight, and I don't like the idea of that one bit, because my cold is worse than it ever was. That is due to being out in the pouring rain all Saturday. We had to practice putting up our tents in the pouring rain, and that's one hell of a job. Then Saturday afternoon we went on a 3-hour road march, and we had to take 136 steps a minute, and I was really beat when we got back. They have to get us in condition." While he was at Camp Atterbury, Indiana, and did not hear from Trudell for a week, he asked her to write more, telling her, "I would rather get one letter from you than a million from anyone else. I wish I could be home to see you and be with you." When a guy is hundreds of miles away from someone he loves, he can realize a lot of things it wasn't possible to realize when he was home. I think of all the good times I had when I was with you, and all the silly little spats I used to start over nothing at all. I really don't know what the heck is going on half the time, because my mind is always miles away from what is going on and is concentrating on you." A few weeks into training, he wrote, "Well, We haven't really got down to business yet, but we are starting for sure. This first 3 weeks has to get us in routine of Army life, but from now on, they are going to be really strict. We had a good lecture Saturday morning on learning to be killers. Our motto is to kill or be killed. I got my steel helmet and it fits me okay. The overshoes I have are size 12, and what a job it is to keep them clean and to lug them around in the mud and rain. We get paid a week from Tuesday, and everybody is looking forward to that. A couple of weeks later, in response to the awaited letter from Trudell in an envelope labeled, "I'm not in history with you anymore," O'Neill wrote of a mutual acquaintance that he just doesn't know what he's got waiting for him at Fort Devens. That place is just plain lousy. He was happy to make plans to exchange photographs, having cleared a spot on his shelf for a photograph of Trudell. Over time, he added multiple photographs to what he called his collection of photographs of her. Later, when he received a clear plastic cigarette case with his rations while serving in Europe, he placed 2 photographs of Trudell inside so that he would see her every time he got a cigarette. While in training, he also updated her on his classes, writing, "My classes had been going very good. Some guys fall asleep sometimes and they get hell. Some guys are so dumb here, they think a woman's monthly is a magazine." O'Neill got up to mischief while in basic training, such as the time O'Neill wrote to Trudell that he had come down with scarlet fever, which landed him and a friend in the hospital for weeks. When they started to feel better, the two of them commandeered the radio, and to use O'Neill's words, were raising hell. Due to this behavior, they were confined to their beds, and the nurses confiscated their pajama pants. O'Neill persisted, sneaking around in a towel for a time, but was eventually caught and sent back to his room. In 1943, Doris Trudell graduated high school. In early May, O'Neill wrote to her while on a week-long field exercise. After informing her that he and the others had killed a 5-foot-long black snake, and asking her to excuse any dirt on the pages, told her about a possible upcoming furlough. He asked, "If I could get home, would I be able to go to the prom with you? And what would the arrangements be? I mean, how would I be able to take you out? Please answer soon." O'Neill spoke to his battery commander after returning from the field. Upon learning the reason that O'Neill wanted the furlough for the dates he specified, the commander assured him that he would make sure O'Neill's furlough was timed so that he could bring Trudell to her prom. O'Neill was able to return to Nashua, and he did indeed take Trudell to her prom. This is a photograph of them on prom night. O'Neill served with the 908th Field Artillery Battalion, 83rd Division, and arrived in France on D+12, or 12 days after D-Day, to relieve the 101st Airborne Division. He told Trudell that he was in France as soon as he was allowed, after sending her short V-mails for a time, alluding to his being busy. On June 26th, he wrote her a longer letter, which included some of his experiences. "I got to experience another boat ride, only this one was much shorter, for we crossed the English Channel, and it was pretty rough. I got a little seasick at noontime one day, but after lying down, I slept it off. But for a while, my old stomach really felt like it was coming up. What I have seen so far, I will never forget, and people back home don't realize for 1 minute what war can do to a town or a village or a city. Men that took part in that invasion, that is, the D-Day invasion of Normandy, should be respected by everyone back home, because if you could get to see the place where they invaded, you would have to stop and wonder just how they ever did get on and get control of part of the French soil and manage to stay there. The French people seem pretty glad to see us. They say things to us, but none of us can understand what they say, and they can't understand us. The Air Force is playing a big part over here with their continuous bombing missions, and after reading all these months about big formations of bombers over France, I am now seeing them, and it's really a sight to see. Of course, there are many things I would like to be able to tell you, but those things will be told to you when this is all over. So much for France. How's my honey these days? Even without Trudell's letters, we know that during this time she was busy purchasing things the couple would need when they set up a house together through comments from O'Neill, such as the time he suddenly asked in the middle of a letter something to the effect of, "What dishes? When did we get those?" O'Neill's morale, based on his letters, was directly tied to the mail and receiving letters from Trudell. By the end of 1944, he was in Germany. On Christmas Day, he wrote to Trudell, "My morale is down quite a bit. It has been 4 days now since I have heard from you, and I really expected to hear from you today, but I didn't. I guess my Christmas packages will arrive any time between now and next Christmas." Hardly any of the fellows got their packages from home, and the Army mail services sure proved a flop in my estimation. He went on to write, "The days are getting much cooler, especially the nights. It gets really raw, and the cold goes clear to the bone. Every night the past 3 nights, the moon has got bigger and brighter, and makes me more homesick for you." He seemed to be in much higher spirits after New Year's, having received his packages in several letters, even though he was writing by flashlight and using his knee as a table. O'Neill did not tell Trudell much of his fighting experiences, although he did reference that he had one battle start in early January 1945, and wrote that he had quite a few coming. You get one for every major engagement against the enemy. O'Neill served in the liberation of Belgium, and by the end of January, he wrote, "It has been pretty cold and snowing, and we have gotten Belgium all cleaned up, and I guess we will be going back to Germany. The Russians are doing very good with their winter offensive, and they are well on the road to Berlin." When O'Neill wrote to Trudell on May 7th, Germany had surrendered. He wrote, "I imagine everyone is celebrating back home over Victory Day in Europe. The Germans have finally unconditionally surrendered to the US, Britain, and Russia. It has been 11 tough, rugged months, and I thank God that I am still alive to see this day. Right now, I am in a small town called Solingen, and we have moved in to occupy it to keep law and order. It's a beautiful setup. I'm in what used to be a doctor's home, and it's a swell place. I have 2 hours of guard in the daytime and 3 at night. From now on, we will keep our shoes shined and in dress uniform and keep as neat and clean as possible, for we must make an impression on these people they won't forget. It's just hard to believe it is all over here. This country is completely ruined and will take years to be rebuilt. How did the people act back home when they heard the news? It's going to seem funny to be able to take a good hot bath every day and to wear clean clothes all the time." O'Neill also hoped that if he was sent to the Pacific to fight against Japan, that he would be sent via the United States so that he might be able to stop and see Trudell on his way. O'Neill served on occupation duty in Germany for several months, during which his desire to return home intensified. On November 25, 1945, O'Neill wrote to let Trudell know that she could stop writing because he would be coming home soon. He wrote, "Honey, I miss you very much, and it's going to be so good to see you. That's all I need. I can't put it in words, but you're everything to me, and I love you very much." Near the end of the year, he was finally able to return home. On December 27, 1945, James O'Neill sent Doris Trudell a telegram from Camp Kilmer, New Jersey. It reads, "Back in good old USA. All well. Can't wait to see you. Home soon. Love, Jimmy." James O'Neill and Doris Trudell were married on June 1, 1946, 6 months after O'Neill returned home. Mail and communication between those in the military and on the home front, was highly valued by many, and when the mail service was running smoothly, kept morale high. Today, these letters and telegrams allow individuals who can only now tell their stories through what they left behind, tell them in their own words. All of these individuals are featured in the exhibit with memorabilia which once belonged to them. Please find them in the exhibit and enjoy.